Welcome to the CannMed Coffee Talk podcast, where we talk with the leading minds in cannabis science, medicine, cultivation, and safety testing. I am your host, Ben Amirault. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at Medicinal Genomics and proud member of the team that puts on the CannMed Summit. Okay, we just announced our first round of poster presenters who will be sharing their work at the CannMed 25 Innovation and Investment Summit this June in Puerto Rico. You can read all about each of them on our speaker page at canmedevents.com, along with our confirmed oral presenters and panelists who will be participating in the Cannabis Genomics Workshop and the Compliance Testing Workshop. You can check out the CannMed Practicum instructors as well, and don't forget that doctors and clinicians can earn 6 continuing medical education credits by attending the Practicum. All the details are at canmedevents.com. Be sure to sign up for email alerts so you get all of our announcements delivered directly to your inbox. And please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Oh yeah, and don't forget to register to join us at CannMed 25. We've gotten a great response on our early bird promotion, which did expire last week, but there are still great ticket packages available. We'd love to see you in June. Check out the details again at canmedevents.com. Our guest today is Dr. Shawna Vreeke. Shawna is head of research at True Terpenes, where she is instrumental in developing and maintaining the rigorous safety and quality protocols the brand is known for. Shawna is an active advocate for science-based safety parameters to protect consumer health and has worked with policymakers to implement sensible regulations to protect public health and maintain access to regulated cannabis products. She has multiple peer-reviewed papers on vape safety, and most recently, her work has been adopted into 2 ASTM global standards. At CannMed 25, Shawna will present Toxicological Risk in Cannabis Vapes, Exogenous Additives and their implications on consumer safety. It will highlight specific higher risk ingredients and identify how prevalent they are in vaporization products currently in the cannabis market. During our conversation, we discussed the main components of cannabis vape products, how and why exogenous ingredients are added to vape products, how toxicological risks are evaluated based on hazard and exposure level, why one can't assume that safe food ingredients are also safe for inhalation, why risk assessment-based regulations are a better approach than outright bans on flavors, and more. Before we get to my conversation with Shawna, I'd like to thank this episode's sponsor, McKinney RSA. McKinney is made up of regulatory science veterans who apply lessons learned in the nicotine space to help cannabis manufacturers better understand the toxicological and societal implications of their product. They do that by identifying base compounds, extracts, flavors, and terpenes, understanding how they interact, and ensuring effectiveness for the intended use. They also provide dosing recommendations and establish guidelines for product consistency. Learn more at mckinney.rsa.com. Okay, and without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Shawna Vreeke. Good afternoon, Shawna. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for having me here. I'm really excited.
I'm excited too. First of all, I'm excited that you're going to be joining us at CannMed 25 in June down in Puerto Rico. The name of your talk is going to be Toxicological Risks of Cannabis Vapes, Exogenous Additives and Their Implications for Consumer Safety. As we were saying before we started recording here, cannabis vapes are very popular, so I think this is a very popular topic. But before we dive into it too deep, I wanted to just ask you off the top, what motivated you to conduct this study on the toxicological risks of cannabis vapes?
Yeah, that's a great question. What really motivates me and like everything I do here at True Terpenes is always about consumer health and safety. So with vape products, it's a unique product in the cannabis space because it allows the manufacturer to add or adjust levels of different ingredients. Um, that's going to be different than, say, a flower, where you can't really adjust how many cannabinoids or terpenes or other additives that go into it. So, because you have this ability to do that with vapes, we were curious to see what types of ingredients are being used when they're creating these vape formulations and to compare where True Terpenes stands within the industry.
Excellent. So that's a great segue because I was curious. So you mentioned different ingredients. So what are sort of the main components that we find in cannabis vape products and how do they vary?
So, cannabis vape products, there's a few different categories. I would say the most common ones are going to be made with a distillate. And a distillate is like a very refined cannabinoid extract from the flower. And when you go through that refining process, you oftentimes will lose all the volatile terpenes and other flavor molecules that are naturally in the cannabis plant. So, to kind of recreate that natural composition of the plant, manufacturers will add terpenes and other flavorants back into this distillate extract. Like I said, those are probably the most common types of formulations, but you also have live resin, which is going to be a more broad spectrum extract. Or you're going to have like a live rosin, which the live rosin is going to be the most like delicate way of extracting. So those will oftentimes carry the natural terpenes into the extract. But in regards to these like terpene additives, there's a lot of different compounds that can be included. And I'm going to use the word terpene as an umbrella term going forward just for ease of conversation. But that also includes terpenoids, esters, flavonoids, ketones, aldehydes, lots of these really high volatile, high aromatic compounds that are often naturally in the cannabis plant, but we can also add some other ones to kind of increase the aroma, create new and unique flavors that cannabis consumers really enjoy.
Excellent. So you said that it's most common for it to start with sort of the distillate, as you said. So in what form is that? Is that like a powder or is it sort of that oily, viscous material that we actually see in the vape pen? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's usually that oily, viscous material. If it's really refined, it can be a more clear amber color, or if it's more closer to like a live rosin material, it's going to kind of be a more like a darker amber, like a golden kind of extract. But it is very viscous. So without any terpenes at all, it can be very challenging to like aerosolize it in a
Mm.
vape device because it's just so thick. So the terpenes also help to liquefy it a little bit so that it can be, efficiently aerosolized in the vape pen.
Excellent. Explain a little bit more about the methodology behind your toxicological risk assessment that you're performing.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, toxicological risk is a component of the the unique hazard risk of each ingredient coupled with the exposure level. So I always like to describe this in terms of alcohol. Most of us are all very familiar with alcohol. So, for example, ethanol, that is the compound that has the inherent risk in alcohol. And so we understand the toxicity of ethanol. Then you compare with the exposure level. So, for example, one glass of wine, you're probably going to feel totally fine. You'll wake up the next day, feel totally great, go about your day, no problem. So that is a very low exposure to ethanol. So the risk is very low. But then let's say, after I do my presentation, I'm really excited. I'm going to celebrate and I drink a whole bottle of wine. So that's a much higher exposure. And while I'm drinking that bottle of wine, I might lose a little bit of balance, right? I might say things that I think are really funny, but maybe not be so funny. And then the next day when I wake up, I'm probably going to be very dehydrated. I might have a headache, but ultimately, I have a really great breakfast. And by the end of the day, I feel totally fine again. So the risk between, a glass of wine and a bottle of wine is a little bit higher because we're getting exposed to a higher level of that ethanol. So that's the idea behind a risk assessment, because nothing, and I mean nothing in this world, is 100% safe. So it's really important to understand the inherent risk of that individual component, but then also to understand how much of that component, how much of that ingredient can a consumer be exposed to without having any risk, or without having any, the risk is at a negligible level.
Mm.
So the methodologies that I employ here at True Terpenes includes surveying all of the publicly available data on each individual ingredient, compiling all that, reading it, understanding the conclusion, and then I perform a set of calculations, which is very standard in toxicology. And so these calculations do things, for example, if it was a study with a rat, we need to understand what that means in a human. So I do a calculation to put it into the levels that a human would be exposed to. Then I need to put it into the exposure of a cannabis consumer, right? So I understand how much is a cannabis consumer vaping every single day? How much of this extract are they being exposed to every day? So that's a really important calculation. Then once I get that once I get that answer from the human exposure level, I apply a set of uncertainty factors, or safety factors, they're sometimes called. And so what that means is we found this limit from a study where there was no adverse events to the rat, but we're not 100% sure if a rat is totally equivalent to a human. So we're going to apply this uncertainty factor, which brings this no effects level down, let's say 10 times. So now it's a 10 times smaller limit. So it's going to be more conservative limit. So we can be more confident that that limit is not going to cause harm to our cannabis consumers in the final product. So that's kind of a brief overview of, what a toxicological risk assessment is and how I perform that.
Excellent, excellent. So in your example with alcohol, you were mentioning how ethanol is sort of the compound that can cause harm, I guess, for lack of a better term. So when you're looking at cannabis vapes, what are sort of the ingredients that are kind of interest?
I try to look at every single ingredient that's in there. Even impurities are important to look at. So, you can do this work with cannabinoids, but there's been a lot of studies done on THC and CBD and the common cannabinoids that are going to be in these extracts. So I try to focus on these other additives that are in there, like the terpenes, right? I work at True Terpenes. So what we really care about are these like terpene blends that are being added into this distillate. So I look at every single ingredient within this terpene blend, and some terpene blends can have upwards of 40 different components in it. So I perform a risk assessment on each individual component.
Excellent. Excellent. And yeah, no, it's great that you mentioned terpenes, because especially in vapes and them being added back in, they can sometimes be at unnatural levels, right? So that would be a concern, or at least something to look at.
Exactly. They can be in unnatural levels, or they can be at levels that are a different ratio from each other than what's found in the natural plant.
Excellent, excellent.
Mhm.
And before too, you were talking about as you were analyzing sort of the exposure risk, you were taking into account how much of a consumer typically vapes every day. So what is that figure or what is that range?
Yeah, so here at True Terpenes, we like to do a range from like 75 milligrams a day to 100 milligrams a day. And this is based on a few different studies that I've done. I did a study in partnership with PAX when PAX had the smart pods. And so
Hmm.
they were getting real use data. So we analyzed, probably over 1,000 different data points. And we were able to come up with the consumption of 95% of users. And the reason why we choose 95% instead of, say, the median is because we're really trying to protect most cannabis consumers out here. If you pick the average use, then you're only protecting 50% of consumers. So we just felt like, that wasn't really the best use of this program. And then there's been other studies that have been published in peer-reviewed journals that looked at consumption from vape products. And so we compiled all those, and that's how we get this range.
Excellent. So I know that you don't want to reveal too much of your findings. Got to save that for CannMed, which I completely understand and appreciate. But can you explain how and if you identified some more toxic additives in some of these vapes and sort of what are the implications there for consumer health?
So we first analyzed a variety of different terpene blends that are sold on the market. Internally, we have a GCMS in-house that can
Mhm.
do terpene analysis. So we first ran all the products in-house to analyze kind of the total composition of these blends. Then what I did is narrow down our target list of compounds to a select few that at True Terpenes we choose not to use at all because I think the safety profile is just not there. It's more hazardous than it's worth using. So that is kind of the target list that we started with. Then we sent out a select of these samples to third-party labs. So we tested them by 2 third-party labs to validate and verify the results that we found in-house.
So you were analyzing products on the market for sort of a hit list of compounds that are sort of known to be um, risky.
Yes, more or less.
Excellent. Okay.
Mhm.
And so you mentioned that you at True Terpenes, you guys do not use those for obvious reasons. What I mean, I know you can't really necessarily say why others do, but is it because it's a flavor enhancer or some other reason for maybe some of these additives?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, a lot of these ingredients are really commonly used in food. So, they have a safe history of use. They are approved by the FDA for use in food. Most of them are GRAS. We've heard that a lot, generally recognized as safe.
Mm,
However, none of those account for inhaling these compounds. So, when I do the risk assessment, I go beyond just oral application and I assess what would it do if we inhale these compounds. And that's where we see a higher risk factor. And I will stress that none of these compounds do I believe are going to affect your consumers today, right?
mm,
Consumers are not dropping like flies using these vape products. So they're not so extreme that I'm like, oh shit, cannabis consumers are in like deep shit right now. What we're looking at is 20, 30, 40 years from now.
hmm
We really want to see the longevity of the cannabis industry. And so we want our clients that use our products to be able to sell these materials to consumers for as long as consumers want to use these products. So, like I said, I don't think we're going to see problem with these ingredients today or tomorrow or next year, but over 20 years, that's where we're going to see these negative effects start adding up. And so we're really cautious about that because, like I said, we want to see the cannabis industry thrive for generations to come.
Yeah, and when you consider that a lot of younger, the younger demographic is really drawn to vapes too. They probably use it more than anyone else. This long-term effect is even more important.
Exactly.
So, based on your results, do you see regulatory bodies kind of adopting stricter guidelines or requirements for testing for these products?
So my hope is that regulatory bodies don't start banning things, right? We don't want to see flavor bans. We've already seen that in some states, and really that doesn't lead to safer products. It just leads to much more restrictive products, much more expensive products, and consumers are oftentimes going to just travel to other states to get these products that they want, or they're going to start buying them again from the black market. And that's worst case scenario. We do not want to drive consumers to the black market. So my hope is that regulators will start adopting standards. So I've drafted and we got 2 ASTM standards approved. And ASTM is a global standard organization. They have sectors in pretty much every single industry, including, shapes of stop signs, safety glasses, even sex toys have ASTM standards to apply to. So I authored 2 ASTM standards around performing a risk assessment for these exact types of ingredients that go into cannabinoid products that will be vaporized. So my hope is that regulators will start adopting these standards and say, if you're going to use these exogenous ingredients, they need to have been performed this risk assessment or they need to follow these 2 ASTM standards. And then what can happen is regulatory bodies can go to these manufacturers and audit their risk assessment program. So that's my ultimate goal. Instead of saying this ingredient is banned, this ingredient is banned, they just say, okay, they need to comply with these 2 ASTM standards, which is how it is in many industries already today.
Yeah. And so would that risk assessment be performed on, individual ingredients or an entire formulation or both?
It could be performed on both. So if you perform it at the ingredient level, it's a little bit easier because we know, like True Terpenes and other terpene companies, know exactly what individual ingredients are in the blend since we build it compound by compound. So it's easier to perform the risk assessment at that level. But if you are, say, a vape manufacturer and you are creating terpene blends yourself, or you're adding terpenes isolate by isolate as well, you can perform this risk assessment, or you can send your extract to a lab that can do analysis on the chemical composition of it, and then you can perform the risk assessment on the individual components that show up in the lab result.
Excellent. And I guess just to clarify here too, this risk assessment is being performed on ingredients that, the manufacturer or the processor knows they are putting into the product. It's not so much for, contaminants that are part of the processing, the the processing process, like, residual solvents and things like that, correct?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm really glad you brought it up because we do want to clarify in the ASTM standard, it does specify that contaminants and impurities are not within the scope of the standard because most of those are already regulated by the regulatory bodies. So it's really important to continue doing those impurities, residual solvents, heavy metals, etc. Do that testing by your third-party lab. Follow the action limits that are in the regulatory agencies that you're selling the product into. That first and foremost, you need to have compliant products.
Right.
But yeah, these standards are specifically for, exogenous ingredients that are being added back in. You can perform this risk assessment on, for example, like a live rosin product that's a natural extract of the cannabis plant. But I always like to stress that I am not here to police the plant. If the plant creates X amount of limonene and you have, efficient extraction, and so that's how much limonene is in your final product, then that's great. I'm not here to tell you that's too much limonene. If the plant makes it, humans have been smoking the plant for hundreds of years, if not more.
Mm.
So there's a long, safe history of use there. So I'm not worried about natural extracts from the plant. We're really focused on exogenous ingredients that are being added back in.
Right. Yeah. So it's sort of like there's that base level of safety testing to make sure that there's no impurities and there's no contamination. And you're just going one step further to be like, okay, whatever we're adding in here, let's make sure that it's at levels that are safe for consumption.
Exactly.
Excellent. Yeah, and I remembered what I wanted to ask you about too, because you were mentioning that a lot of these ingredients are generally regarded as safe, but that's more for ingestion and not for inhalation, which I think that there's some carryover there with what we do here at Medicinal Genomics, where we do microbial testing. And a lot of the regulations sometimes are just lifted from food testing without taking into account the fact that it is an inhaled product and there are different risks for different microbials when those are ingested that way. So that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. The risk of inhaling something is much higher than the risk from eating it, for example, because when you eat something, it goes through the metabolism that's in your stomach. So that's going to change the compound. It goes through the liver, that changes the compound. So by the time these ingredients are actually absorbed into your bloodstream and then travel through your body, they've been changed, they've been altered. In toxicology, we assume that it's only 50% of the original ingredient is what's actually traveling through your body. Versus when you inhale something, it goes from your lungs directly into your bloodstream. So
Mm.
there is no metabolism that happens. Essentially, there's no metabolism that happens within the lungs. So we in toxicology assume that 100% of the active ingredient is being is being exposed throughout your body. So that's why it's a higher risk factor.
Interesting. Great. So, what is sort of the key takeaway that you hope that the industry professionals and regulators kind of gain from this presentation and this work?
Yeah, I really just want the whole industry to be safer. I really want to lift up all products. And a big thing is like there are ways to substitute some of these ingredients with ingredients that still impart the same flavor but have a much higher safety profile.
Mm.
And then if we can't do that, if we can't hit a flavor and make it safe, maybe that's the best step forward for the whole industry. Do we really need coffee flavored cannabis vapes if they're gonna be, potentially toxic to our consumers? I don't think so. Like, I really want to push, product development teams to challenge themselves to create these flavors with safer ingredients, or, let's just all band together and agree not to create certain flavors at all, because really consumer safety should be top priority. It shouldn't be on the shoulders of consumers to understand if their product is safe or not, to
Mm.
make that risk versus reward choice. That's a lot for them to burden. So I would like the industry to take on that burden, and we can still innovate. I mean, True Terpenes still makes awesome, super strong, innovative flavors, even with this program. And we've had this program for 4 years now. So
Mm.
everything that's on the market today from True Terpenes is going to comply with these toxicological assessments. And I still think we have, the best flavors out there. So this is not going to stifle creativity. Your consumers are still going to love your products, and they're going to feel more confident using these products, for as long as they want to use them. Because really, consumers clearly find these products beneficial. So for them to be able to, no questions asked, take a product that they know is beneficial and have that confidence that it's only going to provide benefit for them, that's what I want to see.
Excellent. No, and you don't have to name names or name flavors, but you in that example that you gave, are there certain flavors that you've sort of identified like, yeah, we really can't make this flavor safely? I mean, again, you don't have to say exactly what that is. You probably save that for CannMed, but has that come up? Has that happened?
There are flavors that are really challenging to make with ingredients that have high safety profiles. But we've done really good with, skirting around that and finding a way to make these flavors. It is a challenge, but if you got the best PD team out there, you should be confident in your product development team. They can find a way.
That's awesome. Great. All right. So winding down here a bit, Shawna, we've mentioned that you're going to be down at CannMed and we're excited to have you. Are there any types of professionals in general that you're looking to connect with down there so that if they're seeing this and they know that you're looking to connect with them, they can make the trip down?
Yeah, I mean, there's some like really fantastic speakers there. That's why I really love CannMed, because I think it brings in, the top tier scientists in the cannabis industry with like the most cutting edge research. But one person I'm really excited to collaborate with is Bonnie Goldstein. We've talked a little bit about creating products for pediatric patients that she works with and utilizing terpenes to create really effective blends for them. And I think the work that she does is super fantastic. And I mean, she is just awesome to be, providing these products to pediatric patients.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a great collaboration, and hopefully we can make that happen. All right, so winding down, I did want to give you the opportunity to share any other resources or links that you think might be of interest to anyone who's watching or listening to learn more about you and the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, so if you go on the True Terpenes website, we have a few blogs that go over the toxicological program. We have a few news articles that go over the ASTM standards, the toxicological review. And if anyone is interested in accessing these ASTM standards, they can reach out to me. I'm happy to share them. I'm really hoping everyone starts taking this work seriously, and let's lift up the whole cannabis industry.
Excellent. Yeah, if you want to send me some links to those blogs and those resources, I'd be happy to put them in the show description so people can easily find them.
Awesome.
And I'll put your contact info in there too, if people want to get those standards,
Yeah,
or they can come to CannMed and meet you in person.
right. CannMed. Puerto Rico, how can you say no?
I know. Yeah, we're so excited. All right, Shawna, thanks again for joining me on the podcast, and yeah, look forward to seeing you in a few months.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. It's going to be great.